The scent of stale oil and simmering resentment was Lynn's constant companion. It clung to the worn curtains, permeated the threadbare rug, and seemed to seep from the very walls of the modest house she shared with her husband, Nom, and his mother, Mrs. Tran. For Lynn, an orphan taken in by Nom's kindness, every sunrise brought with it the familiar weight of scorn, a burden far heavier than the endless chores that filled her days. Mrs. Tran, a woman whose sharp features seemed permanently etched with disapproval, rarely missed an opportunity to remind Lynn of her humble origins. Look at her! She'd often sneer to no one in particular, yet loud enough for Lynn to hear from the kitchen. Eating our food, living under our roof. And what does she bring? Nothing but a pretty face and empty hands. Lynn would clench her jaw, her slender fingers tightening around the scrubbing brush or the vegetable knife, her eyes fixed on the task at hand. She had learned long ago that silence was her only shield against Mrs. Tran's verbal assaults, a fragile defense that often felt like surrender. Her mornings began before dawn, the chill of the unheated kitchen a stark contrast to the warmth of her small, shared bed with Nom. She would prepare breakfast, clean the house, wash clothes by hand, and run errands. All while Mrs. Tran watched from her armchair, a critical eye scrutinizing every move, a misplaced cup, a speck of dust, a slightly burnt rice grain. Each was an excuse for a fresh barrage of complaints, delivered with a theatrical sigh and a shake of the head that conveyed profound disappointment. Lynn had no memories of her own parents, only vague, fleeting images of a kind woman and a strong hand, fading with each passing year. She had grown up in an orphanage, learning early the lessons of self-reliance and quiet endurance. When Nam, a gentle and compassionate man, had chosen her as his wife, Lynn had dared to hope for a haven, a place where she truly belonged. But Mrs. Tran had seen her as an intruder, an unworthy addition to their family, and had made it her mission to ensure Lynn never forgot her place. The emotional burden was immense. Each cutting remark, each dismissive glance, chipped away at Lynn's spirit, leaving her feeling utterly insignificant. She often wondered if she truly was as worthless as Mrs. Tran made her out to be. In the quiet solitude of her tasks, a profound loneliness would settle over her, a cold, heavy blanket that no amount of scrubbing or polishing could dispel. Yet, beneath the layers of hurt and exhaustion, a tiny ember of resilience flickered, a silent refusal to be completely extinguished. She had survived worse, she reminded herself, and she would survive this too. But for now, her life was a constant, grueling battle against the shadow of disdain. In the suffocating atmosphere of Mrs. Tran's constant disapproval, Nom was Lynn's solitary anchor, a quiet beacon in the gloom. His presence, often a silent one, was enough to soothe the raw edges of her spirit, while his mother's sharp words cut deep. Nam's gentle touch, a fleeting squeeze of her hand under the dinner table, or a shared glance that spoke volumes, reminded Lynn that she was not entirely alone. Nam was a man of few words, but his actions resonated with a profound, unwavering devotion. He worked long hours at a local factory, his hands calloused and tired, yet he always returned home with a soft smile, reserved just for Lynn. He would subtly try to shield her from his mother's cruelty, though his efforts often went unnoticed or were dismissed by Mrs. Tran. If Mrs. Tran complained about Lynn's cooking, Nam would praise it effusively, distracting his mother with questions about her day. If Lynn was burdened with too many chores, he would quietly take some on himself, washing dishes late into the night or helping her hang laundry before dawn. One evening, after a particularly harsh scolding from Mrs. Tran about a minor imperfection in the freshly ironed shirts, Lynn retreated to their small room, tears welling in her eyes. Nam followed, his face etched with concern. He didn't offer empty platitudes or confront his mother directly. He knew it would only escalate the tension. Instead, he simply sat beside her on the edge of the bed, pulling her gently into his embrace. He stroked her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort, letting her cry into his shoulder until the storm passed. "You are strong, Lynn," he whispered, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Don't let her words define you. You are worth so much more." His love was a fragile but persistent hope, a promise whispered in the quiet moments they shared. It was in the way he always saved the sweetest fruit for her, or how he would subtly adjust the blanket over her when she fell asleep. He never openly defied his mother, knowing the consequences, but his quiet acts of rebellion, his unwavering belief in Lynn, were a powerful counterpoint to Mrs. Tran's negativity. Lynn clung to these moments, drawing strength from his quiet resilience and his steadfast affection. In a world that often made her feel invisible, Nam saw her, truly saw her, and loved her for who she was. His love was the only thing that hinted at a future beyond her current despair, a faint but steady light guiding her through the darkness. The mundane rhythm of Lynn's life was abruptly shattered one Tuesday morning by the arrival of a letter. It wasn't the usual utility bill or a flyer for a local market. This was an envelope of thick, cream-colored paper, bearing an embossed crest and addressed formally to Ms. Lynn Nguyen. It looked utterly out of place on their worn wooden table, a stark anomaly in their humble home. Mrs. Tran, who habitually intercepted the mail, snatched it up with a suspicious frown. Her eyes narrowed as she scrutinized the elegant script and the unfamiliar return address, Lee and Associates, Legal Counsel, a prestigious law firm. Her gaze flickered from the envelope to Lynn, a sneer already forming on her lips. "What is this nonsense?" she demanded, her voice dripping with contempt. "Who would be writing to you from a place like this? A scam, no doubt, or perhaps a joke at your expense." Lynn, wiping her hands on her apron, felt a strange flutter in her chest. She had never received anything so formal, so important-looking. "I don't know, Mother," she replied softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Perhaps it's a mistake." "A mistake!" Mrs. Tran scoffed, tearing open the envelope with an exaggerated flourish. Her eyes scanned the contents, and a harsh, derisive laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, this is rich. They're inviting you to a meeting. Something about an estate and important matters. Do they know who they're writing to, an orphan with nothing but the clothes on her back?" She crumpled the letter slightly, her face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "Don't tell me you actually believe this? Lynn dreaming of riches? Are you connected to some grand estate? It's laughable." She tossed the letter onto the table as if it were contaminated, her eyes sparkling with malicious glee. "Just throw it away. It's clearly some trick. Or maybe someone is playing a cruel prank. Don't waste your time, or ours, on such foolishness. See what it's about?" Mrs. Tran shrieked, her voice rising. "Are you mad? Nam encouraging her fantasies, she'll just make a fool of herself. And by extension, us." Lynn, however, felt a peculiar pull. Despite Mrs. Tran's ridicule, a tiny spark of curiosity had ignited within her. The letter felt significant, almost destined. It was a formal invitation, not a crude advertisement. What if, just what if, it wasn't a joke? What if there was something, anything, beyond the endless cycle of chores and scorn, against her usual inclination to avoid confrontation? A quiet resolve began to form. She would go. She had to know. The cryptic message, seemingly out of place in her meager existence, held an inexplicable allure, a whisper of a possibility she couldn't ignore. Despite Mrs. Tran's vehement protests and dire warnings of public humiliation, Lynn's quiet resolve held firm. With the crumpled letter clutched in her hand, she found herself standing before the imposing glass doors of Lee and Associates, Legal Counsel. The building was a towering structure of steel and glass, reflecting the bustling city street around it, a stark contrast to the small, weathered house she called home. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open, stepping into a world of polished marble, hushed tones, and an air of undeniable importance. The reception area was minimalist yet luxurious, adorned with modern art and plush leather seating. A receptionist, impeccably dressed, greeted her with a polite smile that seemed to hide no judgment, a welcome change from the scorn she was accustomed to. "Ms. Lynn Nguyen, Mr. Lee is expecting you. Please, follow me." Lynn's heart hammered against her ribs as she was led down a long corridor, past doors marked with names that sounded important and powerful. Finally, they stopped at a heavy wooden door. The receptionist knocked softly, then ushered Lynn inside. The office was vast, filled with the scent of old books and expensive wood. Behind a large mahogany desk sat a man with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. This was Mr. Lee. He was stern, his face unreadable, Yet there was a surprising, almost gentle quality in his gaze as he motioned for her to sit. "Ms. Nguyen," he began, his voice deep and measured. "Thank you for coming. I understand this must be quite perplexing for you." Lynn nodded, her voice caught in her throat. Mr. Lee leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "My purpose in contacting you is to convey a most extraordinary truth. You are the granddaughter of Mr. Huang Min, a man who, until very recently, was one of the wealthiest and most reclusive magnates in this country." The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Lynn stared, her mind struggling to process them. Magnate granddaughter. The only grandfather she had ever known was a distant, almost mythical figure from vague orphanage stories. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "My grandfather. I don't have a grandfather like that. I'm an orphan." A flicker of empathy crossed Mr. Lee's stern face. "Indeed, Ms. Nguyen, your existence was kept from him for many years. Your mother, his daughter, eloped against his wishes and tragically passed away shortly after your birth. Mr. Huang Min, consumed by grief and regret over their estrangement, spent decades searching for you, his only grandchild. He finally located you just a few months ago. But regrettably, his health was already failing. He passed away last week." Lynn felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. The world spun, the elegant office blurring around her. Her mother, a daughter of immense wealth, her grandfather, a reclusive billionaire. This revelation didn't just shatter her understanding of her own identity, it obliterated the very foundation of her past, replacing it with a hidden history of unimaginable privilege and profound tragedy. The quiet, insignificant orphan was, in fact, the sole descendant of a titan. The weight of scorn she had carried for so long suddenly felt impossibly light, replaced by an even heavier, bewildering weight, the weight of an unknown legacy. The air in Mr. Lee's office, once merely formal, now crackled with the weight of revelation. Lynn, still reeling from the shock of being the granddaughter of a magnate, could only nod mutely as Mr. Lee continued, his voice a steady drone that slowly began to piece together the fragments of her forgotten past. "Your mother's name was Huang Lan," Mr. Lee began, consulting a thick file on his desk. "She was Mr. Huang Min's only child, a brilliant and spirited young woman. However, she fell deeply in love with a man of humble origins, a talented artist named Tran Duke. Mr. Huang Min, a man of immense pride and traditional values, vehemently disapproved of their union. He saw it as a betrayal, a stain on his family's esteemed name." Lynn listened intently, her mind painting a picture of a love story she had never known. Her mother, spirited and rebellious, choosing love over wealth. It was a stark contrast to her own life, where she had always felt bound by circumstances. Despite his objections, Lan and Duke eloped. Mr. Lee continued, his gaze softening slightly. "They lived a simple, happy life, far from the opulence your grandfather offered. Your mother gave birth to you, Lynn, shortly after their elopement. But tragedy struck swiftly. Within months of your birth, both your parents succumbed to a virulent fever that swept through their village. You, a mere infant, were left an orphan." A sharp pang shot through Lynn's chest. Her parents, gone so soon. The void she had always felt, the absence of parental love and guidance, suddenly had a name, a reason. It wasn't just that she was an orphan. She was the orphan of a forbidden love, a love that had cost her parents their lives, and her grandfather, his daughter. Mr. Huang Min was devastated by the news of his daughter's death. Mr. Lee explained, his voice tinged with a solemnity that spoke of profound regret. He learned of it too late to reconcile, too late to say goodbye. The guilt, the grief, consumed him. He immediately began searching for you, his only link to his lost daughter. He hired private investigators, used all his resources. But your parents had been so thorough in their disappearance, so determined to live their own lives, that it took years, decades. In fact, Mr. Lee paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. He finally located you, Ms. Nguyen, just a few months before his passing. He had been monitoring your situation, your life with the Tran family. He saw your quiet strength, your resilience, and he was deeply moved. He wanted to make amends, to ensure you received the life you were always meant to have, free from hardship and scorn. He wished to meet you, but his illness progressed too rapidly. Lynn felt a strange mix of emotions, sorrow for the parents she never knew, a profound sense of loss for a grandfather who had searched for her for so long, and a bewildering sense of destiny. The pieces of her fragmented past were finally clicking into place, revealing a history far more complex and tragic than she could have ever imagined. She was not just an orphan, she was the last thread of a powerful lineage, a living echo of a secret past that had finally, dramatically, come to light. The weight of her hidden connection to immense wealth, and the sorrow that came with it, settled upon her. A new, heavy mantle. The day of the will reading dawned with an oppressive humidity, mirroring the tension that hung heavy in the air. Lynn, dressed in the modest, slightly ill-fitting dress Nam had insisted she wear, felt a tremor of apprehension as she entered the opulent boardroom. The room was a spectacle of polished wood and gleaming brass, filled with a collection of stern-faced individuals she vaguely recognized from old photographs. Mr. Lee had shown her, distant relatives of the late Mr. Huang Min, their expressions a mixture of feigned sorrow and barely concealed avarice. Mrs. Tran was already there, perched stiffly on the edge of a plush chair, her eyes darting around the room, taking in every expensive detail. She had insisted on accompanying Lynn, ostensibly to supervise, but truly to ensure Lynn didn't embarrass them, and perhaps to sniff out any potential crumbs of wealth. Her face was a mask of suspicion, her gaze frequently landing on Lynn with a mixture of disdain and bewildered curiosity. Mr. Lee, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of calm authority, stood at the head of the long table. He cleared his throat, and the hushed murmurs in the room died down to an expectant silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the solemn space, "we are gathered here today for the reading of the last will and testament of the late Mr. Huang Min." He proceeded to outline the deceased's vast holdings, the sprawling real estate empire, the international manufacturing conglomerate, the significant stakes in tech startups, and the immense financial portfolios. The numbers he cited were astronomical, each figure drawing gasps and greedy glances from the assembled relatives. Mrs. Tran's eyes widened with each mention of billions, her posture stiffening with a desperate, unspoken hope that some of this unimaginable fortune might trickle down to her family. Then, Mr. Lee paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the room before settling on Lynn. "Mr. Huang Min, after careful consideration and a lifelong search, has designated his sole heir." A collective intake of breath filled the room. The relatives leaned forward, their faces taut with anticipation, each convinced they were about to hear their own name. "His granddaughter," Mr. Lee announced, his voice clear and unwavering. "Ms. Lin Nguyen." The words hung in the air for a beat. Then chaos erupted. A woman shrieked. A man slammed his fist on the table, and a chorus of indignant protests filled the room. "Impossible. This is a travesty. Who is this girl? She's a nobody." Mrs. Tran's face, which had gone from hopeful anticipation to utter bewilderment, now contorted into a mask of furious denial. Her jaw dropped, then snapped shut, her eyes bulging. She pointed a trembling finger at Lynn. "Her an orphan. A nobody. This is a trick, a cruel joke. She can't be his granddaughter. It's a lie." Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch, echoing the outrage of the other relatives. Lynn sat frozen, the cacophony of disbelief washing over her. The room was a blur of angry faces and flailing arms. She was the sole heir, the entire multi-billion-dollar corporation. It was a reality too grand, too sudden, to comprehend. The shock was profound, a dizzying sensation that threatened to overwhelm her. But amidst the clamor, a quiet strength began to stir within her, a nascent understanding that her life, and the lives of those who had scorned her, had just been irrevocably turned upside down. The transition from the cramped, scorn-filled home to the gleaming, high-stakes world of corporate power was jarring, almost surreal. Lynn, still grappling with the enormity of her inheritance and Mrs. Tran's escalating hostility, found herself standing at the threshold of Huang Min Corporation's headquarters, a colossal edifice that seemed to touch the clouds. It was a world away from the dusty streets she knew, a world she was now expected to command. Her first day began with a meeting with the executive board, a collection of seasoned, sharp-suited individuals whose expressions ranged from thinly veiled contempt to outright skepticism. They saw not the rightful heir, but an inexperienced young woman, an orphan from obscurity, thrust into a position of immense power. Mr. Li, ever the steadfast guardian, introduced her with quiet authority, but the atmosphere in the room remained thick with unspoken judgment. Ms. Nguyen, began Mr. Chen, the chief operating officer, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow and an air of self-importance. We understand your unique circumstances. However, running a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate requires a certain level of expertise and experience. We trust you are prepared for the immense challenges ahead. His tone was polite, but his eyes conveyed a clear challenge, a silent dare for her to fail. Lynn felt a flush creep up her neck, but she met his gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I am here to learn, and to lead the company my grandfather built to even greater heights. I am committed to this responsibility. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, reports, and complex financial jargon that often left Lynn's head spinning. She spent hours poring over documents, trying to decipher balance sheets and market analyses. The executives, while outwardly deferential, subtly tested her, throwing complex questions her way, observing her reactions with keen interest. Some offered patronizing advice, others outright dismissed her ideas. Confident she wouldn't understand, she quickly realized that inheriting the company was only the first step. The will might have granted her ownership, but it did not bestow respect or control. The corporate labyrinth was filled with hidden passages and treacherous traps. There were ambitious executives vying for power, long-standing traditions that resisted change, and a pervasive undercurrent of doubt about her capabilities. Every decision, every interaction, felt like a test. One afternoon, she overheard two junior managers whispering in the hallway. She won't last a month. She's just a figurehead. The real power still lies with the board. The words stung, but instead of deterring her, they ignited a quiet fire within. She had faced scorn and dismissal her entire life. This was no different. Lynn knew she had to prove herself, not just to the board, but to every employee who doubted her. She began to spend late nights in the office, reading every file, studying every report, absorbing every piece of information she could. She asked countless questions of Mr. Li, who patiently explained the intricacies of the business. She might be inexperienced, but she was not unintelligent, nor was she easily intimidated. Stepping into this lion's den was terrifying, but Lynn was slowly, surely, learning to roar. The challenge was immense, but so was her burgeoning resolve to earn her place and truly lead. Lynn's late nights in the office, fueled by strong coffee and an unyielding determination, began to yield more than just a grasp of corporate finance. As she delved deeper into the company's intricate records, a subtle disquiet began to gnaw at her. Certain figures didn't quite add up. Some contracts seemed unusually favorable to external parties, while others appeared to have been hastily pushed through. It was like finding a few mismatched threads in a meticulously woven tapestry, small anomalies that, when viewed together, suggested a larger, more sinister pattern. Her initial focus had been on understanding the company's operations, but now, a new, unsettling objective emerged to uncover the truth behind these irregularities. She started cross-referencing documents, comparing current reports with historical data, and scrutinizing the minutes of past board meetings. The more she dug, the more convinced she became that something was amiss. Transactions involving a shell company, Phoenix Holdings, repeatedly appeared, often with inflated invoices or suspiciously low asset valuations. One evening, while reviewing an old audit report from the year before her grandfather's passing, Lynn noticed a discrepancy in a major land acquisition deal. The reported value was significantly higher than market rates, and the beneficiary company was, once again, linked to Phoenix Holdings. A cold dread began to settle in her stomach. This wasn't just sloppy accounting. It felt like deliberate manipulation. She brought her concerns to Mr. Li, who listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave. Ms. Nguyen, your instincts are sharp, he conceded, his voice low. I had my suspicions, but without concrete evidence, it was difficult to act. Mr. Huang Min became increasingly reclusive in his final years, and access to certain financial records was restricted. Even for me, together, They began to piece together the puzzle. They discovered a series of complex, layered transactions designed to siphon funds from the corporation, masking the true beneficiaries. The trail was cunningly obscured, leading through various offshore accounts and dummy corporations. It became chillingly clear that this was not the work of an outsider, someone within the inner circle, someone with intimate knowledge of Mr. Huang Min's operations and his declining health, had been systematically bleeding the company dry. The whispers of betrayal grew louder, echoing through the empty corridors of the corporate building as Lin worked late into the night. It wasn't just about financial fraud. It was a profound act of treachery against her grandfather, a man who had dedicated his life to building this empire. The thought that someone he trusted, someone he might have considered family or a loyal associate, could have exploited his vulnerability in his final days, filled Lin with a righteous anger. This revelation transformed her mission. It was no longer just about proving her worth. It was about seeking justice for her grandfather and protecting his legacy from the very people who sought to dismantle it from within. The corporate labyrinth, she now realized, was not just a challenge to navigate, but a battleground where hidden enemies lurked, waiting to strike. The revelation of the internal conspiracy transformed Lin's approach to the company. The corporate world was no longer just a labyrinth to navigate. It was a battlefield where she needed allies. Fortunately, she found them in unexpected places. One by one, the board members, initially skeptical or indifferent, began to voice their support for Lin. The scale of the betrayal, the audacity of the fraud, was too great to ignore. Votes were cast, swift and decisive. Mr. Levan and Mr. Chen were immediately stripped of their positions, their corporate careers ending in disgrace. Legal proceedings were initiated, promising severe consequences for their actions. The fall of the arrogant conspirators was swift and absolute. But the true mastermind, Lin and Mr. Li soon discovered, was not just Mr. Chen. He was merely a pawn, albeit a willing one, in a larger scheme orchestrated by a distant relative, Mr. Levan, a man who had always resented Mr. Huang Min's success and had felt entitled to a share of the family fortune. Levan, a seemingly benevolent figure who rarely appeared at company events, was the true owner of Phoenix Holdings. He had meticulously planned the embezzlement for years, exploiting Mr. Huang Min's failing health and reclusiveness, using Mr. Chen to execute the fraudulent transactions from within. In the back of the room, Mrs. Tran had watched the entire spectacle unfold. Her initial disbelief had given way to a dawning comprehension, then a profound, unsettling realization. The nobody she had scorned, the orphan she had ridiculed, had just dismantled a powerful conspiracy and saved a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Lin, with her quiet strength and unwavering integrity, had achieved what no one else could. The malicious rumors Mrs. Tran had spread, the cruel words she had uttered, now echoed hollowly in her own ears, a testament to her own blindness and prejudice. Mr. Chen's smile faltered. His eyes darted to the documents, his composure beginning to crack. What about them? Ms. Nguyen, all perfectly legal, I assure you. As the meeting concluded, and the room began to empty, Mrs. Tran remained seated, her gaze fixed on Lin. When Lin finally turned, their eyes met. There was no triumph in Lin's expression, only a quiet dignity. Mrs. Tran felt a lump form in her throat, a bitter taste of regret on her tongue. All those years of scorn, all that bitterness, all for nothing. The woman she had tried to diminish had risen, not through cunning or deceit, but through sheer resilience and a relentless pursuit of justice. Mrs. Tran scoffed, her eyes narrowing. What nonsense are you spouting now? Trying to justify your ill-gotten gains. Later that day, back in their modest home, Mrs. Tran approached Lin, her shoulders slumped, her usual sharp demeanor replaced by a fragile vulnerability. Lin, she began, her voice hoarse. I was wrong. About everything. About you. Tears welled in her eyes. Genuine tears of shame and remorse. I judged you unfairly. I was cruel. I'm so sorry. Are they? Lin challenged, her gaze piercing. Because these documents, cross-referenced with internal audit reports and bank statements, suggest otherwise. The inflated valuations, the hidden transfers, the direct links between Phoenix Holdings and Mr. Levan, it all points to a systematic embezzlement. She pushed forward a final document, a signed agreement with Mr. Chen's own signature, authorizing a particularly egregious transaction. And this Mr. Chen bears your signature. It directly implicates you in the fraud. It was an apology Lynn had never dared to dream of, a moment she had never expected. The years of pain, the silent suffering flashed before her eyes, but looking at Mrs. Tran's broken expression, Lynn saw not just her tormentor, but a woman finally confronting her own errors. The victory in the boardroom was significant, but this quiet moment of genuine remorse felt like a deeper, more personal triumph. Justice, it seemed, was not just for the powerful, but for the quiet, the scorned, and the truly deserving. The dust of the boardroom battle settled, leaving behind a new landscape for Huin Min Corporation. With Mr. Levon and Mr. Chen gone, a palpable sense of relief and renewed purpose permeated the company. Lynn, now firmly in control, wasted no time in beginning the arduous process of rebuilding. Her first priority was to restore trust and transparency. She initiated a comprehensive internal audit, streamlined financial processes, and implemented stricter ethical guidelines. She held town hall meetings with employees, listening to their concerns and sharing her vision for a company built on integrity and shared success. She promoted loyal, talented individuals like Ms. Mai, who became an invaluable asset in the new ethical accounting department. Her most crucial alliance was with Mr. Li, who, beyond his professional duty, felt a deep sense of loyalty to the late Mr. Huing Min and a growing respect for Lin's tenacity. He became her invaluable mentor, patiently explaining complex legal and financial strategies, and acting as a shield against the subtle machinations of the board. Your grandfather was a man of immense foresight, Ms. Nguyen, he'd often say, but also a man who trusted too easily in his later years. We must be twice as vigilant. He provided her with access to encrypted files, introduced her to key contacts, and helped her understand the subtle power dynamics at play. The changes weren't just structural, they were cultural. Lynn fostered an environment where ideas were encouraged and hard work was recognized. She invested in employee training, improved working conditions, and established clear channels for communication. The company, once a rigid, hierarchical structure, began to breathe, transforming into a more collaborative and dynamic entity under her leadership. Mr. Chen's face drained of color. His smugness evaporated, replaced by a desperate, trapped look. He stammered, tried to deny, to deflect, but Lin's evidence was irrefutable, meticulously compiled, leaving him no room for escape. The treachery, once hidden in the shadows, was now laid bare, ready for the world to see. The reckoning had begun. The atmosphere in the Huin Min Corporation boardroom on the day of the special meeting was charged with an almost unbearable tension. Every seat at the long, polished table was occupied, not just by the usual board members, but also by Mr. Levon, whose presence, though outwardly composed, carried an unsettling stillness. Mrs. Tran, surprisingly, was also present, having been informed by Nom that this meeting would determine Lin's future, and perhaps her own. She sat in the back, a silent, pale observer, the earlier confrontation with Lin still fresh in her mind. While the corporate world demanded her attention, Lin also turned her focus to her personal life, particularly the fractured relationship with Mrs. Tran. The apology, raw and unexpected, had opened a fragile door. Lin knew that true healing would take time, but she was willing to try. She extended an olive branch, not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent acts of kindness. She invited Mrs. Tran to dinner, not as a formality, but as a genuine invitation to share a meal. She listened patiently as Mrs. Tran, still humbled, recounted stories of her youth, stories that revealed a woman shaped by hardship and fear, much like Lin herself. "No," Lin replied, her voice gaining strength. "I am telling you the truth. My mother, Huang Lan, was the only daughter of Mr. Huang Min. She eloped with my father, Tran Duke, your late husband's brother." Mrs. Tran, after a period of reflection and genuine remorse, slowly began to change. The sharp edges of her personality softened. She started offering Lin unsolicited help with household tasks, her criticisms replaced by quiet observations. One afternoon, She even brought Lynn a cup of tea while she was working on company documents, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just months prior. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but it was real, built on a foundation of shared understanding and a mutual desire for peace. Lynn, though her heart pounded a relentless rhythm against her ribs, walked to the head of the table with a newfound composure. She had spent countless hours preparing, meticulously organizing every piece of evidence, rehearsing her presentation until every word was precise. Mr. Lee stood beside her, a silent pillar of support, his presence a clear signal of the gravity of the situation. Throughout this tumultuous period, Nam remained Lynn's steadfast rock. He had witnessed her transformation from a scorned orphan to a powerful leader, and his admiration for her had only deepened. He offered unwavering emotional support, celebrated her victories, and comforted her during moments of doubt. Their bond, forged in adversity, grew stronger than ever. He was her confidant, her safe harbor, and the quiet strength that grounded her amidst the whirlwind of her new life. Lynn knew that no matter how vast her empire became, Nam's love was her most precious treasure. Years passed, and Lynn, once the scorned orphan, stood as a towering figure in the corporate world. Her transformation was complete, not just in wealth and power, but in spirit. She had not merely inherited an empire, she had redefined it. Huyn Min Corporation, under her visionary leadership, became a beacon of ethical business practices, innovation, and social responsibility. She spearheaded initiatives to invest in renewable energy, established educational scholarships for underprivileged youth, and championed fair labor practices across all her subsidiaries. Her vast resources were no longer just a symbol of power, but a tool for profound positive change. The discovery sent a cold shiver down Lynn's spine. Levan was a smooth operator, a master manipulator who had cultivated an image of respectability while secretly bleeding the company dry. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and his connection to the family made the betrayal even more heinous. Lynn's journey from the shadows of disdain to the pinnacle of success became a story whispered in boardrooms and celebrated in communities. She was a testament to the power of resilience, kindness, and unwavering integrity. Her past, once a source of shame and vulnerability, was now a foundation of strength, allowing her to empathize with those facing adversity and to lead with genuine compassion. Nam, who had been quietly finishing his breakfast, looked up, a furrow in his brow. He picked up the discarded letter, smoothing out the creases. "It looks legitimate, Mother," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "It wouldn't hurt to just see what it's about." Her relationship with Mrs. Ointran had blossomed into a fragile but genuine bond. The old woman, truly humbled by Lynn's forgiveness and her own profound realization, had become a quiet, supportive presence in Lynn's life. She often visited Lynn at the sprawling estate that was once Mr. Huyn Min's. Now Lynn's home, bringing homemade dishes and sharing stories, her eyes reflecting a newfound respect and affection. The bitterness had faded, replaced by a quiet contentment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lynn began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the hushed murmurs. "We are here today to address a grave matter concerning the integrity and future of Huyn Min Corporation. For months, I have been investigating irregularities within our financial records, and what I have uncovered is a systematic scheme of embezzlement and fraud, orchestrated from within. And Nam, her steadfast husband, remained her anchor. He never sought the limelight, content to be her quiet strength, her confidant, and her greatest supporter. Their love, forged in the crucible of hardship and strengthened by shared triumphs, was the true bedrock of Lynn's life. They built a family, a home filled with love and laughter, a stark contrast to the silence and scorn Lynn had known in her early years. The words hit Mrs. Tran like a physical blow, her face, usually a canvas of disdain, contorted in shock. What are you saying?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Lynn often reflected on her journey, from the small, dusty house to the gleaming towers of her corporation. She had faced adversity, betrayal, and the crushing weight of prejudice, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Her grandfather's legacy was not just in the billions of dollars, but in the spirit of resilience and the pursuit of justice that he had unknowingly instilled in her. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Mr. Chen, seated opposite Lynn, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting nervously towards Mr. Levan, who remained impassive, as the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow on the Huinmin Corporation building. Lin looked out from her executive office. The future stretched before her, bright and full of purpose. She had found her true place, not just as an heiress, but as a leader, a philanthropist, and a woman who had proven that even the most scorned can rise to inspire the world. Her story was a living testament that kindness, courage, and integrity, when combined with an unyielding spirit, could overcome even the most formidable adversities, forging a legacy that would endure for generations to come. As these alliances solidified, Lin also began to identify her primary adversaries. The most obvious was Mr. Chen, the CEO. His initial skepticism had morphed into outright obstruction, and his attempts to undermine Lin were increasingly blatant. He constantly questioned her decisions, delayed critical information, and subtly turned other executives against her. His ambition was a palpable force in every meeting. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Lin then projected a series of meticulously prepared slides onto the large screen. She began with the Golden Valley land acquisition, detailing the inflated purchase price and the subsequent transfer of funds. She presented bank statements, internal memos, and legal documents, each piece of evidence building a damning case. As you can see, she explained, her laser pointer highlighting a key transaction. Funds were siphoned through a series of shell companies, ultimately leading to Phoenix Holdings. My father was your brother-in-law, Lin continued, a hint of sorrow in her tone. My parents died when I was an infant. My grandfather, Mr. Huinmin, spent decades searching for me. His only grandchild. He found me, here, with you. Shortly before he passed away, he knew everything. Mother Tran, he knew how you treated me. He knew the rumors you spread. She then revealed the ownership structure of Phoenix Holdings, displaying documents that clearly linked it to Mr. Levan. A gasp went through the room. Mr. Levan finally stirred, a flicker of something akin to alarm in his eyes, quickly masked by a forced smile. Ms. Nguyen, he interjected, his voice smooth, almost condescending. These are baseless accusations. Phoenix Holdings is a legitimate investment vehicle, and these links are merely circumstantial. Lin now understood the full scope of the battle. It wasn't just about proving her competence, it was about dismantling a deeply entrenched network of corruption. With Mr. Li's strategic guidance and Ms. Mai's invaluable inside knowledge, Lin began to meticulously gather irrefutable evidence, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. She was no longer just the scorned orphan. She was a determined leader, forging bonds and facing foes, ready to reclaim her grandfather's legacy from the hidden enemies who sought to destroy it. The air in the modest Tran household was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable weight that had grown heavier with each passing day since the will reading. Mrs. Tran's venomous whispers had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, but Lin, now armed with a newfound resolve and the truth of her lineage, was no longer willing to endure it in silence. The time for confrontation had arrived. Are they, Lin challenged, turning to face him directly? Or is this a deliberate attempt to defraud the company my grandfather built, an attempt to destabilize it for your own personal gain? She then presented the signed agreements bearing Mr. Chen's signature, directly implicating him in authorizing the fraudulent transactions. Mrs. Tran recoiled, her face paling. The realization that Lin was not just a distant heir, but the daughter of her own brother-in-law, a direct blood relative to the family she had married into, shattered her carefully constructed narrative of Lin being a complete outsider. The scorn she had heaped upon Lin for years now felt like a bitter, self-inflicted wound. A flicker of shame, raw and unfamiliar, crossed her face. The malicious rumors she had spun about Lin's fraud suddenly exposed her own cruel prejudices. Mr. Chen, cornered, finally spoke, his voice trembling. I was misled. Mr. Levan assured me these were legitimate investments. I was simply following orders. Beyond Mr. Li, Lin sought out loyal, long-serving employees who remembered her grandfather's vision before his reclusiveness. She found an unexpected ally in Ms. Mai, a quiet, unassuming head of the accounting department. who had worked for the company for over 30 years, Ms. Mai, initially wary, was touched by Lin's genuine desire to understand the company and her unwavering commitment to justice. She had witnessed the gradual shift in the company's culture, the increasing opacity of certain transactions, and had harbored her own suspicions. With Ms. Mai's discreet help, Lin gained access to older, uncorrupted financial records and internal memos that further illuminated the scope of the fraud. "Orders to commit fraud," Lin retorted, her voice unwavering. "Orders that cost this company hundreds of millions of dollars." The confrontation with Mrs. Tran was a necessary, painful prelude to the larger battle awaiting Lin at the corporation. Armed with the meticulous evidence gathered with Mr. Li and Miss Mai, Lin orchestrated a strategic confrontation with Mr. Chen. She requested a private meeting, ostensibly to discuss a new project, but her true agenda was far more critical. The boardroom erupted into a chaotic exchange. Board members shouted questions, accusations flew, and the air crackled with raw emotion. It was a high-stakes battle of wits and power, with Lin's future and the corporation's integrity hanging precariously in the balance. She stood firm, answering every question, refuting every denial, her quiet strength radiating through the room. The evidence was overwhelming, and the conspirators' desperate attempts to deflect blame only served to highlight their guilt. The climax had arrived, and Lin, the once scorned orphan, was fighting for her legacy and for justice. The chaotic energy of the boardroom slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a stunned silence as the weight of Lin's evidence settled upon the board members. Mr. Levon, his forced smile finally gone, now wore a mask of barely concealed panic. Mr. Chen, slumped in his chair, looked utterly defeated. The meticulous planning, the years of secret machinations, had unraveled in a single, powerful presentation. One evening, as Mrs. Ontran launched into another tirade about Lin's unearned fortune, Lin calmly set down the teacup she was holding. Her voice, usually soft and deferential, was now clear and steady, cutting through Mrs. Tran's rant. "Mother Tran," Lin began, her gaze unwavering. "I have something to tell you. Something important about my past. And yours." "The evidence is irrefutable," Mr. Li stated, his voice calm but firm, addressing the board. "The fraudulent transactions, the shell companies, the direct links to Mr. Levan and Mr. Chen, it all points to a clear and deliberate act of corporate malfeasance." In his opulent office, Mr. Chen sat back, a smug smile playing on his lips. He expected Lin to seek his approval, to defer to his experience. Instead, Lin laid out a series of documents on his polished desk. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I've been reviewing the acquisition of the Golden Valley land parcel and the subsequent dealings with Phoenix Holdings.